There comes a moment in every soul's journey when silence says more than 1,000 apologies ever could. You waited not for revenge, not even for justice, but for truth. And when it finally came, it was dressed in regret, not redemption. The apology you once prayed for now feels hollow, because you already learned how to breathe without it. You already buried the version of you that needed their sorry to heal. And now, as they come knocking with words they should have said when it mattered, they find someone stronger, quieter, and no longer waiting. Timing reveals true intention. There's something deeply revealing about the moment someone chooses to apologize. It's not just about the words they use, it's about the timing. When a person waits until you've rebuilt yourself, until the storm has passed and the dust has settled, their apology doesn't feel like a step toward reconciliation. It feels like a reaction to their own discomfort. Because if they truly understood the weight of what they did, their voice wouldn't have arrived only after silence became your only answer. The truth is, people often don't apologize when you're broken. They wait until you've stopped needing them. When your tears have dried on their own, and your strength returns without their help, that's when they realize what they've done. Not necessarily because they care about your healing, but because they're confronted with something they didn't expect, the consequences of being absent when it mattered most. Suddenly, they see that the space they left was filled not with resentment, but with growth. And now, their apology feels less like empathy and more like regret. An apology, when late, reveals what was hidden all along, that it wasn't your pain they were avoiding. It was their responsibility. And once enough time passes, the apology isn't a bridge, it's a confession, a quiet admission that they see now what they should have seen then, that your silence wasn't bitterness, it was clarity, that your distance wasn't punishment, it was protection. And by the time they understood this, the window for healing together had long closed. We often overestimate the courage it takes to say, "I'm sorry." But what really requires courage is saying it when it costs you something, when the person is still hurting, when it's still uncomfortable, when there's still tension in the air. That's when sincerity is tested. Because a late apology is easier, it's safer, it asks for less. But the kind of apology that truly heals is the one that arrives when wounds are fresh and truth is heavy, not the one that comes years later when healing has already occurred without them. The most difficult thing for many to accept is that the timing of someone's apology tells you everything you need to know about where they were when you were breaking. If someone only finds the words once you've become unreachable, then they were never truly with you to begin with. They were watching from a distance, hoping time would do their part. And when time didn't erase your memory of what they did, they came back not to right the wrongs, but to ease their own conscience. You don't need to hate them to see the truth. This isn't about holding on to pain or refusing to forgive. It's about recognizing that there is a difference between those who show up when you need them and those who only appear once you no longer do. One arrives with love, the other arrives with guilt, and love doesn't wait until it's safe to speak. So when they finally said they were sorry after all the nights you wrestled with questions, after all the moments you had to pick yourself up with no hand reaching back, the words no longer held the power they once did. Because you had already become your own answer, you had already discovered that real healing doesn't wait for an apology. It begins the moment you realize your peace is not dependent on someone else's remorse. Their timing didn't just reveal their regret, it revealed the truth. You were always worth more than their delay. Healing without closure is a superpower. There is a kind of healing that doesn't get talked about enough. It's not the healing that comes with apologies, reconciliation, or even clarity. It's the kind that happens in silence, the kind that takes root when no answers come, when no explanations are given, and when the people who hurt you never return to acknowledge what they did. It's healing without closure, and it may be one of the hardest journeys a person can go through, but also one of the most powerful. We grow up being told that closure is essential, that in order to move forward, we need to understand why something happened, why someone left, why they changed. But what happens when those answers never come? What happens when you're left alone in the wreckage, forced to pick up pieces without any guidance, without anyone to help make sense of it? That's when the real transformation begins. Not because you wanted it, but because you had no other choice. Healing without closure means you stop waiting. You stop holding your breath for the apology that never arrives, for the phone call that never comes, for the moment that will somehow make it all make sense. Instead, you start learning to breathe again fully and freely, even with the weight of unanswered questions. You stop needing their words to validate your pain. You stop looking back, hoping they'll return with an explanation that will finally let you rest. And in doing so, you become something stronger, not harder, not colder, but wiser, more grounded, because you learn how to live without needing everything to be neatly resolved. You realize that peace doesn't always come from what others give you. It comes from what you give yourself. The strength to keep going, the grace to forgive without being asked, the courage to let go without knowing why they let you go first. Closure is often romanticized as this moment of clarity where everything clicks into place. But for many, closure never comes from the other person. It comes from within, in quiet moments, when you finally accept that the story won't be finished the way you hoped. And that's okay, because your life isn't defined by what they failed to say. It's defined by what you chose to build after the silence. When you heal without closure, you learn to sit with discomfort. You learn to coexist with the unknown. And in doing so, you discover something rare, the ability to move forward even when the past still echoes. It's not about forgetting. It's about no longer being held hostage by the need to understand someone who chose not to explain themselves. There's something deeply courageous about choosing to live well despite never hearing the words you deserved. It means you reclaimed your power, you stopped tying your future to their accountability, and in that act of emotional independence, you became the one thing they never expected free. Sometimes, the apology we wait for isn't just about an acknowledgement of pain. It's about validation. We want them to admit what they did because it would affirm what we felt. But healing without that admission teaches us that our experience is valid even if they never confirm it. Your hurt was real, your emotions were justified, and your healing is still whole even without their participation. You didn't just survive what they did, you outgrew the need for them to recognize it. And that is a kind of strength no one can give you and no one can take away. Healing without closure is not a limitation. It's not a wound that never healed. It's a sign that your soul rose higher than the silence they left you with. Regret is a silent punishment. Regret has a way of creeping in when no one else is watching. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic apology or a grand confession. It slips in quietly in the spaces where someone once felt secure, in the moments when they realize the silence they once dismissed has become permanent. And for many who caused harm but never took responsibility, that silence becomes their private burden. Because long after the damage is done and the chance to make it right has passed, regret remains, and it speaks loudly in the quiet. People often mistake closure for an external exchange, a conversation, an apology, a resolution. But regret is what happens when that opportunity fades and they are left to sit with what they never fixed. It's not always visible. You won't always see it on their face or hear it in their voice, but it lingers in the choices they can't undo, and in the moments they wish they could return to. Especially when they see that you've moved on, that you no longer orbit around the pain they once caused. For those who wronged you, the realization often comes too late, not just because they miss your presence, but because they come to understand the weight of their actions only after the consequences become clear. They don't just regret what they did, they regret who they became in your absence. Regret doesn't need revenge. It doesn't come through confrontation. It reveals itself when they look around and find that the space you once filled is now permanently empty, and nothing they say can refill it. Sometimes the greatest accountability a person faces isn't public humiliation or conflict. It's the quiet knowing that they had something meaningful, and they let it fall apart without the courage to protect it. They were offered loyalty, patience, trust, and instead of valuing it, they treated it as disposable. Now, watching from a distance, they see what they lost. And perhaps the most difficult truth for them to face is that you didn't need them in the end, not to heal, not to thrive, not even to forgive. Regret grows stronger over time because time doesn't lie. It keeps showing them who you've become, more confident, more grounded, more at peace, and it reminds them who they chose to be when it mattered. You didn't choose the silence, you were left with it, but you made something powerful out of it. Meanwhile, they're left measuring the distance between what they once had and what they will never be allowed to reach again. And this isn't about hoping they suffer or wishing them pain. It's about acknowledging a truth that doesn't get enough recognition, that some people do live with the consequences of their choices, not because someone punished them, but because life simply showed them what they gave up. Regret is not loud or violent. It's the subtle ache of knowing they didn't rise to the moment, that they were given a chance to do right, and they didn't take it. There's a certain irony in how life works. The person who caused the damage may never fully understand the depth of it until the one they hurt is no longer waiting. And that is when regret truly begins, not when they say, "I'm sorry," but when they realize those words won't change anything. Because by the time they see your value clearly, they've already become a stranger to the healed version of you. Regret doesn't always come wrapped in a confession. Sometimes it lives quietly in the heart of the person who walked away too easily and looked back too late. And in that silence, they carry a weight that no one else can lift, not even you. Growth isn't dependent on their accountability. One of the most liberating truths a person can embrace is this: your growth does not require their apology. Your healing, your evolution, your strength, none of it has to wait for someone else to take responsibility for the harm they caused. It's a hard lesson, often learned in the quiet aftermath of disappointment. But once understood, it becomes a turning point. It's natural to want closure, to believe that in order to fully move forward, you need the people who hurt you to admit what they did. There's something deeply human in that desire, the wish for acknowledgement, for someone to say, "Yes, I see the pain I caused, and I'm sorry." But what happens when that acknowledgement never comes? What happens when they continue on as if nothing happened, while you're left sorting through the emotional wreckage? That's when you discover something powerful. You are still capable of growth, even in the absence of their accountability. You learn that you don't need their recognition to validate your experience. Your pain was real whether or not they admit it. Your healing is real even if they pretend nothing happened. And your growth, perhaps the most important part, becomes something that is built on your own courage, not their regret. Waiting for someone to make things right can quietly stall your life. It can keep you stuck in a loop of hoping, wondering, and holding space for something that may never come. And in that waiting, you lose time, energy, and sometimes even parts of yourself. But when you choose to grow regardless, when you decide that your journey forward isn't dependent on someone else's awareness, you reclaim everything they once disrupted. True growth comes from within. It's shaped by the decisions you make when no one is cheering you on, when no apologies have been offered, and when the path forward feels unclear. It comes from the way you speak to yourself in the aftermath, from the way you choose to believe in your own worth, even if they never saw it. That kind of growth is rooted in self-respect, and it can't be shaken by anyone's silence. You don't need someone's apology to learn the lesson they were supposed to teach you. Sometimes the lesson comes through their absence, through the space they left behind. You begin to see patterns more clearly, you understand your boundaries more deeply, and you begin to define what you deserve, not based on how they treated you, but on how you now choose to treat yourself. The truth is, some people will never take accountability, not because they didn't cause harm, but because facing it would require them to confront parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. That's not your burden to carry. You don't need to shrink yourself, silence your truth, or wait for them to catch up emotionally. Your life doesn't have to pause while they find the courage to look in the mirror. When you stop waiting for them to make it right, you make room for everything that is right for you. Relationships that are mutual, conversations that are honest, environments that feel safe, growth that is uninterrupted by the emotional debts of people who chose not to pay attention when it mattered. Your progress stands as quiet proof that you didn't need them to come back and fix what they broke. You fixed it, you rebuilt it, you grew from it, and now you walk forward not because they showed you how, but because you chose to walk anyway. That choice, that strength, is something they may never understand, but you do, and that's more than enough. By the time they apologized, you were already gone. There is a certain moment when a person returns, perhaps with softened eyes, a slower voice, and words they should have spoken long ago. And yet, instead of bringing comfort or resolution, their apology arrives like an echo in a place you no longer live, because by the time they apologized, you were already gone, not always physically, but emotionally, spiritually, and in every way that truly matters. People often think that apologies will bring back what was lost, that the right words, spoken late, will somehow undo the damage or restore what once was. But what they don't realize is that time changes people. Pain changes people. Silence, too, has its way of shaping a soul. While they were still gathering the courage to admit their part in your pain, you were learning how to stand without leaning on them. You were evolving in the absence they left behind. You didn't wait in anger. You didn't hold on to bitterness. You simply outgrew the place where their apology could reach you, and in that space you found yourself. You rebuilt your trust from within. You learned how to live without the validation you once believed you needed. And so, when their apology finally came, it didn't land in your hands, it landed in the past. And the person who once needed to hear it had already healed into someone else. There's a misconception that healing waits for reconciliation, but sometimes healing is what happens in spite of it. You come to understand that closure isn't always something someone gives you. Sometimes it's what you give yourself the day you choose peace over answers. You stopped needing their side of the story because you realized your pain had already spoken enough. And now, Even though they've come back with words they believe will change everything, you've already stepped into a chapter that no longer includes them. Their apology isn't meaningless, it just belongs to a different time. A time when you were still raw, still hoping, still believing that things could be repaired. But too much has changed, the way you think, the way you see them, the way you protect your peace. And while you may accept their apology with grace, you no longer feel the pull to reopen what you've already buried. This is not about being cold or unforgiving. It's about honoring the journey you've taken to get here. It's about recognizing that sometimes growth takes us so far forward that even sincere remorse can't bring us back. You don't resent them for finally speaking the truth, but you no longer feel tethered to their words. They are arriving at a destination you already passed, and your soul doesn't live there anymore. What they hoped would be a moment of reconnection becomes instead a moment of quiet realization that while they were trying to make peace with their past, you were busy building your future. And that future no longer depends on them. It's not built on what they failed to do, it's built on what you did with the silence they left behind. So you listen, you nod, you may even thank them for their honesty. But deep inside, you know this apology isn't for you not anymore. It's for the version of you who waited, who cried, who tried to understand. And that version, the one they should have spoken to, is long gone. In the end, they didn't find you as you once were. They found someone stronger, someone freer, someone who walked through the fire alone and didn't wait for them to return with water. And that, more than anything, is why their apology came too late.